Hello AMP folks, it is time to begin Chapter 8. And Chapter 8 is all about the joints of the skeletal system. And in this video we'll be looking at the introduction to this, as well as discussing briefly one of the classification schemes that we can use to discuss or describe joints. And so we'll be looking at functional classification. So joints are the bone-to-bone connections and the bone-to-cartilage connections that we see in a skeleton. And because the skeleton is made of bone, which is very strong, all those collagenous fibers, and very hard because of all of the calcium phosphate salts, it's the joints that are the weakest points of the skeleton. So this is the place where lots of damage can occur. When we look at the functions of the joints, their jobs are to secure the bones together, to hold those bones to each other, and to hold the cartilage to the bone, and to allow movements of the rigid skeleton. So we can move the skeleton, and because of that, we're able to move our bodies. It also is there to provide, or it allows a region of bone growth. So the joints, by having these breaks in the skeletal system, it creates the opportunity for the skeleton, the endoskeleton, to get larger over the course of a person's lifetime. And then it also allows skeletal parts to change shape. So as bones grow and develop, there are significant shape changes to them, and so this allows shape change during growth, but it also permits shape change during, say, childbirth, where the plates of the skull can squeeze together some and even overlap a little bit as the child is being squeezed through the vaginal canal. And as the brain grows during childhood especially, there's changes in shape to the skull as well. So lots of functions that we associate with the joints, and that create very functional regions of the skeleton. So when we classify joints, if we're trying to group them into small groups so that we can kind of make sense of them, there are two ways that we can do this classification. The first is by thinking about their function, that is, the amount of movement that the joint can allow. If a joint is a synarthrosis, syn would mean together, so it's this root right here is all about joints. So a synarthrosis is a joint where the two bones are held. Dang it, I keep touching the screen, I apologize. Where the two bones are held together and they are immovable. So these would be examples of this. Well, we'll look at examples soon, so I don't want to jump ahead there. Amphiarthroses, an amphiarthrosis. Amphi means both, so they move a little bit. And diarthroses, these are the joints that are very, very movable. So we can classify by how much movement the joint can do, or we can classify them by what they're composed of and how that composition looks, how they're put together, but how they're built. And so that would be a structural system of classification. And if we were to divide up all the different joints that way, then we could talk about fibrous joints, joints that are built of fibrous connective tissue, or cartilaginous joints. Hopefully you recognize that those would be joints that are composed of cartilage. And last of all would be the synovial joints. These are the joints that have a joint capsule surrounding them and a synovial membrane lining to them, and then are filled with synovial fluid that the synovial membrane makes. So in this video, we're going to look at this functional classification, and we'll start by looking at the synarthroses, the immovable joints. So these are joints that do not allow any real movement, and they include the sutures here in the skull. So we're looking at the sutures in the skull. Another example would be with the teeth, the way that they fit into their sockets. So there is a joint right here where I'm putting my, where that color is being put in there. That is also an immovable joint, a joint built out of fibers of connective tissue that hold the teeth into the tooth socket. And then we have a lot of these synarthroses in the lower parts, in the distal portions of the limbs. So in between the tibia and the fibula, and in between the radius and the ulna. So so this would be one of these synarthroses. Here's another one. So we've got a fibrous joint that connects them. So these interosseous membranes and the interosseous ligaments are both examples of these synarthroses. And then there's another one in between the sternum and the very first pair of ribs. We have an immovable joint there that actually by the time you're an adult, or I should say later in adult, so late in adulthood, that joint actually becomes so immovable that because it's ossified completely, and so that connection is really strong there between the sternum and the first pair of ribs, the very first top ribs on the right and left side. So those are the synarthroses. Next, we'll look at the Amphiarthroses. These are the joints that permit a little bit of movement. So, and some good examples of these Amphiarthroses include the vertebra, or in between the vertebra at the intervertebral discs. So that those joints between the adjacent vertebra, they are not freely movable joints, but they do allow us to bend over and touch the ground, or to stretch up and back into a back bend. So we can get some movement out of them, just not a huge amount of movement. The reason our backs are so flexible then is because there are so many of these discs in between the vertebrae that allow that really allow the range of motion that we get from the back. And then the symphysis pubis, which is the joint between the two pubises, pubic bones. So the right and left pubis are joined together at the symphysis pubis. And I really do have this in the correct order. That's the way it's named, the official name for it. I've been calling it the pubic symphysis, and I believe that that is also a quite fine term to use, but symphysis pubis is more common, or maybe more correct. And here's an x-ray showing where that symphysis pubis is found and what it looks like under x-ray. So Amphiarthroses, they permit just a little bit of movement. And then the last of the functional classification categories are the Diarthroses, the freely movable joints. And these are the joints that possess a joint capsule. In a second, when we look at their structural classification, we'll see them called synovial joints because they have that synovial capsule synovial membrane-lined capsule around them. And so, boy, we have these all over the body. They're probably the most abundant type of joint in the body. And they include the temporomandibular joint. That's the joint between the mandible and the temporal bone up there, the hinge for the jaw, the lower jaw. All the joints in the appendages are diarthroses. The joints of the femur and the tibia. So here is that joint being diagrammed. We have the femur atop, here's the tibia distal, and everything inside of this capsule. Here's the capsule goes all the way up here. So all of that would be considered the joint between the femur and the tibia. The sternoclavicular joint joints the The ones between the sternum and the clavicles would be the sternoclavicular joints. They are diarthroses. And then all the joints between the sternum and the ribs, numbers pair 2, 3, 4, 5, and all the way through 7, would be all diarthroses. Fairly complex joints, these diarthroses are, and so we'll talk a lot more about them in the next video. So this was just a short video just to get you going, and I'll see you in just a little bit as we talk about the structural classification. But again, thinking of functional classifications, there's Synarthroses, or Synarthrosis, if it's plural, then Synarthroses, the Amphiarthrosis, and the Diarthrosis. All right.